At my 25th birthday dinner, my father leaned over and whispered to my sister, "While everyone is occupied at the table, take the master key, drive to Hazel's apartment, and change the electronic locks before she realizes what's happening." My sister nodded, slipped away into the night, and returned an hour later with a face paler than the white tablecloth. She stumbled toward our table, trembling violently as she pointed toward the glass doors and whimpered, "Dad, look over there." Standing at the entrance were federal marshals and bank executives holding a warrant for my father's immediate arrest and the full corporate seizure of his estate. My name is Hazel Roberts. To understand the jaw-dropping shock that paralyzed my father in front of 20 extended family members that night, you have to look into the arrogant, entitlement-driven web of the Roberts family. We lived in Silver Creek Heights, an exclusive coastal enclave where local influence was judged strictly by commercial real estate holdings, yacht club memberships, and multi-generational trust funds. My father, Marcus Roberts, was a prominent regional land developer who ran Roberts Commercial Realty with an iron fist, convinced that his position made him immune to legal consequences or basic human decency. My younger sister Chloe was his pampered creation, a superficial socialite who spent her life relying on our father's wealth while treating anyone who worked for a living with complete condescension. For as long as I could remember, I was treated as the unglamorous outsider in my own family. While Marcus lavished Chloe with luxury vehicles, international vacations, and an endless clothing allowance, he viewed me with cold indifference. When my biological mother passed away when I was 10, Marcus remarried a status-obsessed woman named Evelyn, who quickly made sure that Chloe received every preference while I was relegated to the background. When I chose to pursue a rigorous degree in corporate finance and urban development rather than joining my father's superficial social circles, Marcus mocked my ambitions, publicly telling our relatives that I was merely a dull bureaucrat who lacked the vision to handle real wealth. What my father and stepmother never knew was that my dull career in corporate finance was a front for something far greater. I was the managing director of regional acquisitions at Crestline Capital Trust, a high-stakes institutional fund that specialized in commercial debt buyout, property recapitalization, and distressed real estate enforcement across the region. Because I despised my family's shallow vanity, I kept my professional status, my executive authority, and my multi-million-dollar personal portfolio entirely private. I lived in an elegant, sunlit penthouse atop the Savin Towers, a premier residential complex in the heart of the city, driving an understated sedan and allowing my family to believe I was merely renting a modest single-bedroom unit on a meager salary. Unknown to me at first, my father's grand empire was crumbling beneath the surface. Marcus had spent the last 3 years taking out massive, high-risk commercial loans to finance a failed luxury resort development on the coast. Facing impending bankruptcy and mounting pressure from private lenders, Marcus committed a catastrophic legal crime. He forged my signature on a series of fraudulent guarantor deeds, falsely claiming that my penthouse apartment at Sovereign Towers and the underlying commercial lease of the entire residential complex was owned by his firm and could be pledged as loan collateral.
Marcus believed that because he was my father, I would never question his authority or discover his paper trail. He assumed I was a naive daughter who blindly signed tax documents without reading the fine print. But 4 months prior to my birthday, my risk management team at Crestline Capital flagged an unauthorized lien attempt on the Sovereign Towers master title. When I ran a forensic audit into the filing, I discovered my father's signature right next to a forged copy of my own. Furthermore, I discovered that Crestline Capital had actually purchased 45% of the distressed mortgage debt for Marcus's failing company 2 weeks earlier. Instead of confronting Marcus immediately, I chose to observe his actions with quiet, calculated precision. I instructed my legal counsel to gather certified bank records, handwriting analysis reports, and corporate audit logs, building an ironclad federal fraud case against Roberts Commercial Realty. I gave my father every opportunity to confess his mistakes, to reach out for help, or to show an ounce of genuine paternal care. but Marcus chose cruelty and deception instead. The climax of his arrogance arrived on the evening of my 25th birthday. To my surprise, Marcus booked a lavish private dining room at the Grand Arch, an upscale waterfront restaurant known for hosting the city's political and financial elite. He invited 20 extended family members, including aunts, uncles, and cousins who had traveled from across the state. On the surface, it appeared to be a rare gesture of parental affection. In reality, Marcus had staged the birthday dinner as an elaborate distraction. Earlier that afternoon, Marcus had received a final 30-day cure notice from his primary lender, demanding immediate proof of physical possession over the Sovereign Towers residential units pledged in his fraudulent loan agreement. In his desperate, panic-stricken mind, Marcus came up with a reckless scheme. If he could secretly change the electronic locks on my penthouse door while I was trapped at dinner, he could stage an emergency asset seizure, claim I had abandoned the property, and present the physical keys to his lenders the following morning. We sat around a long candlelit dining table covered in fine linen, polished silver, and crystal glassware. Extended relatives offered polite birthday toasts, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. Chloe sat across from me in a glittering designer dress, repeatedly checking her phone and snickering with stepmother Evelyn whenever I spoke. Marcus sat at the head of the table, sipping scotch, looking at his watch every few minutes with visible impatience. At precisely 8:15, as the main course was being served, Marcus leaned toward my sister Chloe. He cupped his hand over his mouth and whispered in a low, urgent tone that he thought was completely inaudible over the dining room chatter. "While everyone is occupied here, take the spare key fob from my coat, drive to Hazel's apartment at Sovereign Towers, and change the electronic locks," Marcus instructed softly. "Install the new security code I wrote down for you. Make sure you take all her personal documents from her office desk so she can't prove residency tonight." Chloe nodded eagerly, a cruel, triumphant smirk spreading across her face. "Consider it done, Dad," she whispered back. She quietly excused herself from the table, claiming she had to step outside to take an urgent phone call from a friend, and slipped out the side exit of the restaurant into the parking lot.
What Marcus and Chloe did not realize was that I was wearing a subtle, state-of-the-art directional hearing aid, a device I had used for years following a childhood ear injury, which amplified their conversation directly into my ear. I heard every single word of my father's cruel directive. A cold, absolute clarity washed over my soul. The final thread of biological loyalty connecting me to Marcus Roberts snapped into pieces right there at the dinner table. I didn't cause a scene, I didn't scream, nor did I demand an explanation in front of our relatives. Instead, I calmly picked up my smartphone under the edge of the linen napkin and sent a pre-formatted text message to Arthur Sterling, the chief legal officer at Crestline Capital Trust, and Commander David Vance of the Regional Financial Crimes Task Force. "The target has initiated the unlawful breach of Sovereign Towers Penthouse A," I typed. "Execute the federal seizure warrants and notify the precinct team immediately." For the next 45 minutes, I sat at the table with unshakable poise, chatting pleasantly with my aunts and uncles, enjoying my birthday dinner as if nothing were amiss. Marcus sat at the head of the table, looking increasingly relaxed, convinced that his daughter was currently being stripped of her home while trapped in his polite social net. Stepmother Evelyn raised her glass to toast Marcus's brilliant business foresight, boasting to my cousins about a new luxury vacation house they planned to purchase by the end of the month. At 9:15, the heavy, double-glass doors of the restaurant's private dining room clicked open. My sister Chloe walked back into the room. But she was no longer wearing her smug, condescending smile. Her face was completely drained of color, paler than the white tablecloths, her lips trembling violently as if she were suffering from hypothermia. Her hair was messily windblown,
and her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold her designer purse. Marcus looked up from his glass, a confident, knowing smile spreading across his face. "Ah, Chloe, you're back," Marcus said warmly, gesturing to her empty seat. "Did you take care of that little errand for me?" Chloe then sit down. She stood frozen near the entryway, staring at our father with eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. She couldn't speak. Her jaw worked silently as if she were trying to choke out words that wouldn't form. "Chloe, what's wrong with you?" Evelyn asked, frowning in annoyance. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Sit down and join the party." Chloe slowly raised her trembling arm, pointing a shaking finger back toward the restaurant's main lobby entrance. She looked at Marcus with tears spilling over her pale cheeks and whimpered in a cracked, terrified voice, "Dad, look over there." The entire room fell into an immediate, heavy silence. 20 extended relatives turned their heads toward the glass doors of the private dining room. Stepping through the entrance were 4 uniformed officers from the Federal Financial Crimes Task Force, accompanied by Commander David Vance and Arthur Sterling, the chief legal counsel for Crestline Capital Trust. Walking directly beside them was the head of security for Sovereign Towers and the senior regional vice president of the State National Bank. Marcus's confident smile instantly dissolved. He stood up from his chair so fast that his wineglass tipped over, spilling dark red wine across the pristine white linen tablecloth like a pool of blood. "What is the meaning of this?" Marcus demanded, his voice cracking with a mix of anger and sudden panic. "This is a private family celebration. Who gave you permission to interrupt my event?" Commander Vance stepped forward, pulling a thick, blue-bound folder from his leather briefcase and opening it directly in front of my father. "Marcus Roberts," Commander Vance announced in a stern, authoritative voice that resonated across the silent restaurant. "I am serving you with an immediate federal warrant for corporate loan fraud, systemic forgery, identity theft, and attempted unlawful entry into a residential estate." Stepmother Evelyn let out a shrill gasp, clutching her chest, while my extended relatives looked at each other in utter horror and bewilderment. "This is ridiculous!" Marcus shrieked, his face turning an angry shade of purple. "I am the owner of Roberts Commercial Realty. I have legal rights over the Sovereign Towers property. My daughter Hazel lives there under my commercial lease." Arthur Sterling stepped forward, offering a cold, precise smile as he handed a certified corporate master deed directly to my father. "You are mistaken, Mr. Roberts," Arthur said calmly. "Sovereign Towers is owned entirely by Crestline Capital Trust, and the managing senior partner who authorizes all commercial leases and debt enforcement for Crestline Capital is sitting right there." Arthur pointed directly at me. The entire dining room gasped in collective, overwhelming shock. Marcus stared at me, his eyes bulging out of his head, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Chloe slumped against the wall, weeping hysterically, as she finally choked out the truth. "Dad, when I went up to Hazel's penthouse with the locksmith," Chloe sobbed, her voice ringing through the room, "the federal officers were already waiting inside. They arrested the locksmith on the spot for criminal trespass. They showed me the land registry. Hazel owns the whole tower. She owns your company's debt." Marcus looked at me as if he were seeing a complete stranger for the first time in his life. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The quiet, ignored daughter he had treated as a low-earning clerk was the supreme executive power holding his entire financial existence in her hands. "Hazel," Marcus stammered, his voice dropping into a desperate, pathetic plea as he reached his trembling hands across the stained tablecloth. "Hazel, baby, please tell me this isn't true. You're my daughter. You wouldn't do this to your own father. Tell them it's a family misunderstanding." I stood up from my chair slowly, smoothing the front of my dress, my posture immaculate, my expression completely serene. I looked my father dead in his eyes with cold, unwavering detachment. "An hour ago, Marcus," I said softly, my voice cutting through the room like a razor. "You whispered to my sister to go change my locks. You tried to steal my home on my 25th birthday. You forged my signature on fraudulent bank loans because you thought I was too weak and stupid to fight back." "Hazel, please," Evelyn wailed, dropping onto her knees beside the table, her designer clothes dragging through the spilled wine. "We're your family. Don't ruin us." "Family doesn't forge deeds, Evelyn, and family doesn't try to make their own child homeless to cover their fraudulent debts. You made your choice, and now you will face the law." Commander Vance stepped forward, nodding to his officers. 2 state troopers grabbed Marcus by his arms, yanking them behind his back, and snapped heavy steel handcuffs onto his wrists. Marcus screamed and wept hysterically as he was led out of the restaurant in front of 20 horrified relatives, his executive reputation destroyed forever in a matter of minutes.
The financial and legal liquidation of Marcus Roberts and his inner circle was swift, absolute, and total. Exposed for multi-million-dollar banking fraud and property forgery, Crestline Commercial Realty collapsed into immediate bankruptcy. Crestline Capital Trust exercised its legal right to seize all commercial assets, foreclosing on Marcus's grand mansion in Silver Creek Heights and auctioning off his luxury vehicles to satisfy his outstanding institutional debts. Marcus was convicted on federal fraud charges and sentenced to 4 years in a federal correctional facility. My stepmother, Evelyn, stripped of her lavish lifestyle and facing social exile, was forced to downsize into a tiny, single-bedroom rental on the outskirts of the city, working an entry-level retail job to pay off her personal credit lines. My sister Chloe, unable to rely on my father's trust fund or afford her private university fees, was forced to drop out of school permanently. She took a low-level service job to support herself, completely abandoned by her wealthy socialite friends the moment her family's financial ruin was broadcast across local news outlets. Meanwhile, my life flourished in an atmosphere of unshakable peace, freedom, and triumph. As managing director at Crestline Capital, I expanded our philanthropic operations, creating a multi-million-dollar foundation dedicated to providing legal protection, financial literacy programs, and emergency housing for young women escaping toxic and financially manipulative family dynamics. Surrounded by loyal colleagues, true friends, and a dedicated team, I moved forward into a brilliant future, completely free from the shadows of the past. Walking through the sunlit penthouse of Sovereign Towers, holding my head high, I knew that true justice is never bought with loud threats. It is built through quiet preparation, absolute integrity, and the unshakable power of truth. Educational lesson. This narrative illustrates a fundamental lesson regarding corporate governance, parental responsibility, and the inevitable consequences of financial fraud. Biological connection never justifies criminal exploitation or abuse. When parents treat one child with callous indifference while using their name to execute illegal financial schemes, they destroy the moral foundation of the family unit. Arrogance often creates a dangerous operational blindness, convincing manipulative individuals that those who act with quiet modesty are powerless. In reality, true strength is built on legal diligence, emotional composure, and strategic foresight. When boundaries are violated and laws are broken, accountability is not an act of revenge. It is the enforcement of self-respect and justice. Personal advice. If you ever discover that family members are exploiting your identity, undermining your independence, or treating your home as collateral for their greed, you must act immediately to protect your life.
Do not allow misplaced guilt or toxic loyalty to keep you silent while others dismantle your security. Document every illegal transaction, consult with legal and financial authorities, and establish unshakable boundaries that insulate your future from their control. Never lower yourself to emotional screaming matches. Instead, rely on calm, calculated, and legal precision to hold wrongdoers accountable. Surround yourself with people who honor your integrity and step proudly into the sovereign life you have built.